First one was 15 rounds. This was for the heavyweight title, world heavyweight title. But when we fought the second time, he wasn't champion.
George Chuvalo never hit the canvas in 93 professional fights, despite facing the hardest hitters in heavyweight history. The Canadian warrior earned respect from every legend he battled through sheer toughness and granite chin. Sources close to Chuvalo reveal he studied boxing's greatest champions obsessively throughout his career, spanning 3 decades. His list of favorite boxers surprises fans because it features warriors who valued courage over flashy technique. Industry insiders claim George's choices reflect his own blue-collar fighting mentality and respect for men who stood their ground. Trainers who worked with Chuvalo confirm he admired fighters with unbreakable hearts more than defensive wizards. His favorite boxers span from forgotten brawlers to heavyweight legends, with one common thread binding them together. These 10 fighters earned George's admiration through guts, determination, and refusing to quit under any circumstances. Let's count down who influenced the toughest Canadian in boxing history and why each warrior mattered to him. 10. Rocky Marciano. Rocky Marciano opens George's list as the undefeated champion whose relentless style inspired Chuvalo's own aggressive approach. The Brockton Blockbuster's 49-0 record and devastating power fascinated George during his amateur days in Toronto. Sources say Chuvalo studied Marciano's ability to overwhelm bigger opponents through constant pressure and iron will. The Italian-American legend's refusal to accept defeat resonated with George's own fighting mentality completely. George referenced Marciano frequently when discussing the importance of conditioning and never backing down. Boxing historians claim Marciano's famous training regimen influenced George's own brutal preparation methods. The courage Marciano displayed against Archie Moore and Ezzard Charles taught George about finishing strong in championship rounds. Marciano's perfect record proved that determination combined with power creates legendary status. 9. Jake LaMotta. Jake LaMotta earned George's respect as the raging bull whose toughness defined middleweight boxing. The Bronx fighter's ability to absorb punishment and keep coming forward amazed Chuvalo throughout his career. Sources claim George watched LaMotta's wars against Sugar Ray Robinson to understand how to survive against faster opponents. The ability LaMotta displayed taking Robinson's best shots and remaining upright inspired George's own defensive strategy. George met LaMotta several times in New York during the 1960s and 70s. Industry veterans say LaMotta's stories about fighting through pain influenced George's own pain tolerance in brutal fights. The never-quit mentality LaMotta brought to every match resonated with George's Canadian toughness. LaMotta's victory over Marcel Cerdan showed George that pressure fighters eventually break down boxers. George mentioned LaMotta had the toughest chin he ever studied on film or heard about. The middleweight warrior proved that refusing to fall creates psychological advantages over opponents. 8. Carmen Basilio. Carmen Basilio sits at number 8 as the working man's champion, whose blue-collar approach matched George's own fighting style. The upstate onion farmer's relentless body attack and pressure fighting fascinated Chuvalo during his development. Sources say George studied Basilio's victories over Tony DeMarco and Sugar Ray Robinson to understand middleweight warfare. The ability Basilio displayed moving up to defeat Robinson at 160 pounds inspired George's confidence against bigger heavyweights. George referenced Basilio when discussing fighters who maximized limited physical gifts through determination and work ethic. Boxing analysts claim Basilio's famous left hook to the body influenced George's own body-punching techniques. The working-class background Basilio came from resonated with George's own immigrant family struggles in Toronto. Basilio's 2-division success proved that heart matters more than natural advantages. George stated Basilio represented everything real fighters should be without fancy footwork or defensive tricks. The onion farmer showed that toughness and pressure break down any opponent eventually. 7. Joe Frazier. Joe Frazier earns the 7th spot as the warrior George battled twice and respected immensely. Smokin' Joe's devastating left hook and non-stop pressure created nightmares for every heavyweight he faced. Sources claim Chuvalo studied Frazier's bob and weave style to understand how shorter fighters succeed against taller opponents. Their 1967 fight taught George firsthand about Frazier's incredible strength and body-punching ability. George developed genuine friendship with Frazier after their battles in Madison Square Garden. Industry insiders say Frazier's work ethic and training intensity matched George's own dedication to the craft. The courage Frazier displayed against Muhammad Ali inspired George's own willingness to fight anyone, anywhere. Frazier's Olympic gold medal and professional dominance proved that pressure fighting wins championships. George mentioned Frazier was the strongest heavyweight he ever faced in the ring physically. Smoke and Joe showed that relentless hooks to the body destroy even the toughest opponents. Sixth, Archie Moore. Archie Moore takes the sixth position as the ageless warrior whose longevity amazed George throughout his career. The old mongoose's ability to compete into his late 40s inspired Chuvalo's own extended fighting career. Sources say George watched Moore's light heavyweight dominance to understand how craft and ring intelligence beat younger opponents. The 141 knockouts Moore recorded prove that timing and technique create power more than youth. George met Moore several times at boxing events during the 1960s and 70s. Boxing historians claim Moore's defensive skills influenced George's own survival tactics against devastating punchers. The courage Moore displayed challenging Rocky Marciano and Muhammad Ali showed George that true warriors never fear challenges. Moore's later work with fighters taught George about giving back to boxing. George stated Moore represented wisdom and craftiness that young fighters couldn't match through physical advantages. The ageless wonder proved that experience and ring IQ extend careers beyond expected limits. 5. Ezzard Charles. Ezzard Charles sits at number 5 as the underrated technician whose skills George admired deeply. The Cincinnati Cobra's smooth boxing ability and professional approach fascinated Chuvalo despite their different styles. Sources claim George studied Charles to understand what complete heavyweight boxing looks like technically. The ability Charles displayed defeating Jersey Joe Walcott and Archie Moore showed George that fundamentals win championships. George referenced Charles when discussing fighters who never received proper recognition for their accomplishments. Industry veterans say Charles's humble personality resonated with George's own quiet dignity outside the ring. The courage Charles displayed against Rocky Marciano, despite being past his prime, taught George about professional pride. Charles's victories over multiple Hall of Famers proved that consistency beats spectacular performances. 4. Jerry Quarry, 150 wounds. Jerry Quarry earns the 4th spot as the Irish warrior whose courage George witnessed firsthand in their brutal battles. The Bellflower Bomber's willingness to fight anyone made him a fan favorite during the 1960s and 70s. Sources say Chuvalo and Quarry developed mutual respect through their wars that showcased pure heavyweight toughness. Their 1969 fight became legendary for displaying heart and determination without defensive concerns. George and Jerry became close friends outside the ring despite their brutal encounters inside it. Boxing insiders claim Quarry's tragic decline from brain damage haunted George for decades afterward. The courage Quarry displayed against Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier inspired George's own fearless approach. Quarry's white hope during a difficult era showed George the pressure of carrying expectations. George stated Quarry had a tremendous heart, but paid a terrible price for his warrior mentality. The Irish fighter proved that toughness alone isn't enough without proper defense and career management. 3. Floyd Patterson. Floyd Patterson takes the 3rd position as the gentleman fighter whose courage matched his boxing skills. The Olympic champion's 2-time heavyweight title reigns fascinated George during his own championship pursuits. Sources claim Chuvalo studied Patterson's peekaboo style to understand defensive systems against bigger punchers. Their 1965 fight taught George about Patterson's hand speed and combination punching ability firsthand. George developed respect for Patterson's dignity in defeat and humble personality outside boxing. Industry historians say Patterson's willingness to give opponents immediate rematches influenced George's own code of honor. The courage Patterson displayed moving up from middleweight to dominate heavyweights inspired George's confidence. Patterson's battles with Sonny Liston showed George the reality of facing truly dangerous opponents. George mentioned Patterson was a true gentleman who brought class to heavyweight boxing. The 2-time champion proved that you can be tough in the ring and classy outside it. 2. Joe Louis. Joe Louis sits at number 2 as the Brown Bomber who defined heavyweight excellence for George's generation. The Detroit Destroyer's 25 title defenses set the standard every heavyweight chased, including Chuvalo. Sources say George worshipped Louis as a teenager growing up in Toronto during the 1940s. The devastating power Louis possessed, combined with technical precision, showed George what complete fighting looks like. George met Louis several times and treasured every conversation with the aging legend. Boxing analysts claim Louis' humble approach to fame influenced George's own conduct outside the ring. The symbol Louis became for breaking racial barriers inspired George's respect for boxing's social impact. Louis' comeback attempts taught George about knowing when to walk away from the sport. 1. Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali claims the top spot as George's greatest opponent and most respected rival. The Louisville legend's speed and movement frustrated Chuvalo in their 2 epic battles during the 1960s. Sources claim George learned more about boxing facing Ali than any other opponent in his career. Their 1966 fight went 15 brutal rounds, with George never hitting the canvas despite Ali's punishment. George and Ali developed genuine friendship after their wars that lasted until Ali's death. Industry insiders say Ali's courage outside the ring inspired George's own advocacy work later in life. The respect Ali showed George after their fights meant more than any championship belt. Ali's willingness to face dangerous opponents like Chuvalo proved his legendary status. George stated Ali was the greatest heavyweight ever and the toughest opponent he faced. The greatest proved that speed, skill, and courage together create boxing perfection. George's list honors warriors who valued courage and heart above everything else in boxing. Which tough fighters deserve more recognition? Share your old-school favorites in comments and subscribe for more classic boxing history and legendary fighter stories.